And speaking of the ANC, voting is over at its North West List conference, where more than 100 disputes have been resolved. We're told the conference was delayed for 3 days, and voting finally began after midnight. The provincial task team was accused of manipulating the lists, which will determine who is deployed to the provincial and national legislatures. eNCA reporter Govan Whittles tracking the story for us this afternoon. Govan joins us live from the newsroom here at eNCA. Govan, how far are we now with the counting of votes? Has that begun?
Yes, Tembekile, that has begun. The counting of votes at the North West List Conference is officially underway. When we last checked, they had wrapped up the voting of the different leagues in the province. That's, of course, after the entire voting process was delayed by over 2 days, eventually getting underway just after midnight this morning. But that counting process is expected to go to happen until at least late this evening, also midnight. We're expecting a result perhaps in the early hours of tomorrow morning, perhaps at the latest around midnight tonight. But the reason why this is all taking so long is because of all the care that's been taken by the provincial task team, as well as the national leaders deployed to the Northwest, of course led by Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, to make sure that there aren't any discrepancies in the list conference itself, and to make sure that none of the disputes which had been lodged and dealt with earlier would come back to bite them in the form of court cases. That, of course, being the norm in the Northwest, where the Bojanala region had taken the Northwest provincial task team, the NEC, to court after the disbanding of the PEC. But Tembekile, I did speak to the spokesperson of the provincial task team in the Northwest a little bit earlier to find out exactly why these delays had been taking place. Let's have a look at what he said.
Part of the principles that we established as the provincial task team was that we need a very credible, incident-free and well-run process, taking into cognizance the occurrences in the past attempts. So we had to deal with a lot of disputes and appeals jointly with headquarters team led by Comrade Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, and to ensure that all the branches that participate in the process are legitimate and are branches which are meant to take part of the process. So we spend a lot of our time trying to improve the credibility of the process by dealing with those nitty-gritties. Then that's how we could delay.
Kabelo Matabuche, Govan speaks about dealing with the nitty-gritties. 100 complaints we're hearing have been resolved, but do we have a clear idea of what the nature of these complaints were?
We do, Tembekile. So of those 102 complaints, a majority of them related to the standing of branches which had taken part in the list conference. Some of them also related to the accusation against the provincial task team that they had manipulated the list. But by and large, the question was whether or not the branches which attended the list conference were elected, first of all, were legitimately elected and were branches in good standing. If you remember, this is an issue which has haunted the ANC since 2017. Since the new leadership took over, and that's when it emerged that the ANC was investigating massive membership fraud, particularly in the Northwest, where it was alleged that business people had bulk bought the membership. So that essentially means that as a businessman you paid 2,500 Rand, and in exchange for that you would be able to get 250 memberships which had been paid up for the entire year. So the Treasurer General's Office of the ANC initiated that investigation. That investigation is currently ongoing, but we're seeing remnants of that investigation now popping up at the Northwest List Conference, and that's because the ANC is not entirely sure whether the branches which are showing up to these list conferences in the provinces are actually legitimate branches which have members who paid for their membership themselves. So this is a problem which has been coming along for the last 2 years, and now we're seeing it having a material impact on the Northwest Provincial List Conference. But of course, the ANC is saying that nationally this doesn't mean anything at all. They concluded their national list conference in KwaZulu-Natal this past weekend and basically left space for the North West to conclude their conference and send 25% of their delegates. Just to put it in context, this conference will determine which ANC members will represent the party at the North West legislature after the 2019 general elections, but it will also determine which ANC members from the North West will represent the party in the National Assembly, and that's essentially what's at stake here.
But it's all good and well for the provincial task team to say this list conference has gone ahead and now voting of the nominations, if you can call it that, has now begun. But given the level of distrust from some of its own members of the ANC there in the Northwest, namely those who are seen as loyal to the former chairperson of the province, Supra Mahumapelo, it would not be, I suppose, a far-fetched idea, if you will, to assume that there will be some sort of challenge post the finalization of the list for the Northwest.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The shadow of Supra Mahumapelo looms large over this Northwest List Conference, and we do know that after the Provincial Executive Committee of the Northwest was disbanded, it was Supra Mahumapelo's allies that approached the South Gauteng High Court to challenge that decision. And after he resigned as Premier, he subsequently resigned from the PTT, saying that he believed some sort of purge had been happening in the province after he resigned. And at this list conference, things are no different. Once again, we're seeing his allies allege that the provincial task team is trying to manipulate the entire process to ensure that the representatives of the Northwest to the legislature and to the National Assembly reflect those who were not aligned to the former Premier, Supra Mahumapelo. But the key theme here has been the court cases and the court challenges that have emerged after Supra Mahumapelo's allies or he himself has lost the political battle. And whether or not we're likely to see a repeat of this and another court case emerging from this is it's just too soon to tell at this point. I did speak to the national leadership as well, the former secretary of the Northwest, now acting spokesperson, Dakota Lehute, saying that ultimately, whatever's decided at this list conference will be vetted at the NEC's meeting, which is due to take place around the 19th of January. So even if this Northwest Provincial List Conference decides on its candidate to send to the legislature and candidates to send to the National Assembly, it will be up to the NEC to ratify that decision when it meets on the 19th. And if the NEC says that the list conference didn't happen according to the ANC's constitution, or there was some inconsistencies with the people who were nominated on the list and who appear higher up on the list, the NEC would have the power to then declare that null and void. So even though this list conference has finally happened, the voting has finally happened, and counting is now underway, it would all depend on that NEC meeting at the end of the month. And that's when we'll have a clear indication of whether or not this list conference would have to happen all over again.
Govan, let's leave it there for now. That's eNCA reporter Govan Whittles speaking to us about the ANC's Northwest List Conference.